Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Quantum Bridge, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Geoff Thompson to the show. Welcome, Geoff. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you helping to support me with this book. It's taking this time out of your schedule and promoting it is great. Feels like something I want to plant the seed in lots of places. So I'm very grateful that you've taken the time for me.
Great, you're welcome. So I have to say, before Casper introduced me to some of your work, I wasn't that familiar with it, and I've been catching some bits over the last week, and I found your story very interesting. There's a lot of parallels, you could say, but at the same time, our paths sort of diverged as well. So it's kind of like it's interesting.
Yeah.
Casper is more familiar with yourself. He's known you a long time, so I'll pass over to him, and he can introduce the show a little bit further for us.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Quantum Bridge, and hi, Geoff. Thank you very much for joining us. Hi, nice to see you. Nice to see you. Yeah, as Gary touched on, I've known Geoff since around 2000. I can't remember the exact date, but we met when I'd read Watch My Back and been profoundly affected, actually, by that book in many, many good ways. I read it probably for the reasons that maybe a lot of people pick it up, because it looks like something somewhat salacious, bit of violence in there, treading on the fringes and all of that stuff, and actually found that it was a work of alchemical importance, and it transcended violence. And actually, yeah, that was profound enough for me to reach Geoff and for him to kindly come and talk to myself and some colleagues when I was involved heavily in publishing. So thank you again, Geoff, for that. Thank you for all your friendship and help and support over the last 20 years. And it's just really good to have you here.
Thank you. It's a really lovely introduction. Thanks very much.
Pleasure. And I just wanted to mention also, Gary, that was very good of you to be so open just now, because Geoff won't necessarily know this, although I'm sure he's picking it up energetically. This isn't Gary's most natural format, to be putting himself out into the world like this, Geoff. So yeah, to talk quickly about something like your fear pyramid, it feels very much like Gary is at probably near the top of that. So it's a rather beautiful thing that people are, and that we're living in a time when people don't need to challenge themselves necessarily in this way to move outside their comfort zone, but people are. So again, I think that's a nice correlation. Now, in terms of yourself, Geoff, obviously, as I touched on, we've got a lot of history, but more recently, you were kind enough to send me a copy of your book, 99 Reasons to Forgive. Is it actually out yet, or is it
it's officially out today? Yeah, the 31st of March. So it's officially launched today.
Excellent. And I got a chance to read this, and obviously there are a number of intriguing areas, and the whole thing weaves together in a lovely way. Really enjoyable book. But I think some of the key things for me about the book are lessons around things like reciprocity, if I'm pronouncing that right, and about quantum entanglement, which I thought was again a profoundly interesting area. So Geoff, maybe you want to give frame in some way the book itself, and we can touch on some of those ideas.
Yeah, I was saying before we started the interview that I worked as a bouncer probably 30 years ago in the early 80s, and I've been trying to explain to people recently that it was probably the most metaphysical experience of my life, recorded. This is the original Watch My
lovely.
Back,
Thank you.
Written in a toilet in a factory where I was hired to sweep floors. And I was saying that I'm writing a book at the moment, and I'm 450,000 words in. It just keeps expanding, and it's repeating itself a lot. It's quite Sufi in the fact that it's scattered and it's repeating a lot. But I realized that I was trying to explain that The Doors was a metaphysical experience, and people thought that Watch My Back was just a binary book, but people like you saw something more in it. I attracted some very interesting people. One of my students was one guy I attracted was a priest who said, "I see God in this book." and he became a long-term student of mine. And he's just texted me yesterday. Very beautiful man. So I knew there was something more in it, but I couldn't quite work out what. I realised now, out writing this book, because I said to you, it was an arrogant conceit. I thought I'm going to finish this book in 6 weeks, and just as a rough draft, and then polish it. And I'm kind of 6-7 months in, and it isn't finishing. Yeah. But it made me realise as I was writing about the concept of overcoming evil with good, or overcoming fear with knowledge, or overcoming, darkness with light, or whatever you want to call it. I recognised that this book that I wrote all those years ago, which became this book, that was the first book that was published, was like a concept nucleus. It was like a seed, and it's 30 years later, it's still unfolding. I've been developing it. In Judaism, they would call it Chokmah, which is like a wisdom seed that comes from the crown of the tree of life, and it comes into into this tree of life, and it's developed until it becomes like an articulated knowing or certainty, or yakin, that you can actually operate with, you can actually feel. So I've developed lots of those over the years, but I realized that Watch My Back was that. I used to say to my wife, I feel like I should do more with Watch My Back. I don't feel like it's done enough, because it sold about 100,000 copies, which I know is a lot, but I just always felt it should do more. And she said, leave that book alone. It's doing everything for you. Yeah. It's doing everything it needs to do. And of course, it's unfolded into another 50 books, all come from that book. It's unfolded into, kind of global films, that have won global awards. It's unfolded into stage plays, screenplays, and all of this are crystallizations from this original concept seed, like an acorn that you put into the ground, that has the potential to grow a 500-year-old, 200-foot tree that can produce another 1,000,000 acorns, that each of which has the potential to grow 1,000,000 more. So it's infinite. So I realized that Watch My Back was a concept nucleus, and it's still unfolding, and I don't expect it to stop. So what I thought was, just a kind of just a little book, really. That's the original version.
Yeah.
Written. What I love about it is that it's. I'll just get it for you and show you. It was written.
I've got to read Notes from a Factory Floor as well, which I haven't read. I must read that.
Well, I think you'll like that. If you look at that, it's got the date on it, 1989, when I wrote it.
Oh yeah.
I wrote it in a factory toilet.
Yeah.
So my concept nucleus, my Chokmah, my wisdom spark, was this book, and it's been unfolding ever since. It's been a real blessing for me, and I realised that working as a bouncer was my life in extremis. So I had lots and lots and lots of extreme experiences, all of which I'm unpacking now. Yeah. Lots of darkness there, lots of violence, lots of unkindness. I ended up quite polluted for a while, and each of those pollutions, each of those experiential parasites that were stuck in me, I've had to kind of atone. I've had to unfold and unpack, because each of them contained light. Each fear I had, like you were talking about, Gary, overcoming the fear of maybe being more public. Yeah. Each fear that we face contains a spark of light. It's covered in, fear and obscurity and all the rest of it, but it contains a spark of light. And when we confront that fear and overcome that fear, the notion of overcoming evil with good, that light is released. Now, the danger with that fear isn't just so much that it contains a piece of light that we should be able to unfold. It's the fact that it also blocks light, and it also filters light. So if I've got a parasite in me, like a cognition, a belief that the world is against me, that everybody's a threat, which I had a schema where everybody was a threat to me. All of this beautiful light I get from God or from the universe or from the quantum is going to come through that filter, and has no choice but to project into the world, the images that are on the filter. So for me, that meant standing on a nightclub door, this beautiful light coming through very dark filters, and I was literally seeing the manifestation of my own fears present in front of me, not just people, but infrastructure. You know, I was in thousands of violent situations. I was in hundreds of fights. That was because I got this parasite in me that was afraid of everything. And this light was filtering through it. And I was being shown something that very few people get to see. I was able to see the manifestation of my own fear, the literal manifestation.
Yeah.
So once I understood, because I went on the door to try and understand martial efficacy and to try and confront my fear of violent confrontation.
Yeah.
Once I understood that, it wasn't difficult, you know, because there is an egregore on the door. There's an overriding spirit that says, well, this is Geoff Thompson. This is who he is. This is where he is. He's a second dan in karate. He hasn't got any real practical experience. This is the pace he's able to move at. And this is what he needs to learn at the moment. So it taught me about preemption. It taught me the secret to martial efficacy. But before I could see that, I had to let go of everything I thought I knew, because everything I thought I knew as a black belt was not working in that environment. It did not tolerate that kind of stuff. It was too flaccid and it was too untested. It got no, there was no hench in there. It wasn't hench at all. So I had to let go of that. I had to let go of my teachers. I had to let go of all of the expectations of my lineage and just say to the egregore, what can you teach me? And it showed me a magic trick on the door that was so efficient, Caspar, so efficient that I had to start pulling my punches, because beating people and knocking people out was so easy. It was about preemption. It's about being able to manage the fear, keep the center. Once I could manage my fear, I could manage their fear. I could control their fear. I was like a magician. I could climb inside people, switch the adrenaline on, switch it off. I could trigger the flight response, or I could trigger the passive response, just with the use of sound and with the use of mudras. So I started to learn all this stuff. So I knew what martial efficacy was. And as soon as my consciousness expanded and I understood that, I started to attract people from all around the world who wanted to understand that. Now, that knowledge was there for anybody if they're prepared, you know,
right.
if they're prepared to risk their life to get it.
Geoff, can I interject for a moment? I want to know whether or not at that was that the time that the idea of truth became prevalent in your life? Because the sense that I always got from your work on the door is that, one, you realize the truth of, as you said, martial efficacy, i.e. what worked, and the rest of it had to fall away because it wasn't going to serve you. But the important bit to me about that wasn't that was just some guy in a Coventry nightclub who learnt that bit. It was that you had the bravery to take that back to students, because you were teaching at the time, I believe.
Yeah, I had a class,
and to present that to them in the simplistic way of saying, what we've learnt or been learning to date doesn't work, basically.
I actually said to my class, I said, everything we're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
We're going to change everything.
Yeah. So by doing that, I think that did have a massive ripple out. Well, it did. It's not whether I think it or not. But what I'm keen to understand is, had you ever had that sense of this pervasive and absolute singularity of truth manifest before you, before the door episode? Had that happened in another part of your life, or do you see that as the genesis? Because the reason I'm going on about that is because also that was the point of creation in many ways of the book as well, or what became the book. Yeah. So did that feel like a seminal moment, Geoff, or has it, with hindsight, become more of a seminal time?
If I take it back a few steps, I'll tell you when the seminal moment was. Yeah. That's a really good point. I'll tell you when my search for truth began and my first connection with this wisdom spark or the spirit happened. I was suffering with depression as a younger guy. I was sexually abused and groomed when I was a kid. That left a parasite in me that was untreated. So by the time I was in my 20s, I was young, I was married, I got a family, but I was psychotically insecure, psychotically jealous, afraid of everything. I had moments, you know, I was a bit bipolar. I had moments where I thought I could change the world, and then moments where I was afraid to change my socks, you know. So I got this huge creative urge, but nowhere to place it. And every time I tried to go to the boundaries of that fear, to look at what I really wanted to do, which was write and teach, I was pushed back by the kind of fire and thorns of this parasite, this fear. It wouldn't let me go beyond that boundary. So I just had this one particular depression where it was the same as always. Depression came in, kicked down my door, and bearing in mind I was the second dan at the time, it made it worse. I thought I shouldn't be afraid, and it literally leveled me. You know, it took over my life for 2 or 3 months, and I was, you know, following my wife around the house like a lost puppy. I was waking up at 4 a.m. in a cold sweat, you know, thinking it's going to be a long day. And my wife is asleep next to me. I know she can't help me, Casper. My kids are in the next room. I know they can't help me, and I can't protect them because I'm feeling so weak. I know I can't go to the doctor because I've been, and he doesn't know the answer. The doctor is trying to give me tablets, and I did try that, and it really just didn't suit me. And I just thought, this is my life, because this thing just came in and swept through my life whenever it felt like it. So I thought it was a harbinger of doom. As it turned out, it was a messenger of hope, because at one point I just remember having this moment of righteous anger and thinking, I can't live like this anymore. I refuse to live like this anymore. And the moment I said that, the moment I found that spark of courage, this whole idea for a fear pyramid dropped into my mind like a coin falling through water. And the idea was that I drew a pyramid on a piece of paper, and I wrote my fears down on them. The least fear on the bottom step, the worst fear on the top step, and just basically systematically confronted the fears until I'd overcome them all. My idea was that I would become desensitized to the feelings of fear. I'd overcome these fears and I would be fearless. I didn't realize at the time that I wasn't really overcoming the fears. I was converting the fears into light. So every single one of those fears contained a small piece of consciousness that was blocked. It was blocking the flow of light. It was holding light. It was acting as a filter for light, and it was stopping me from creating a vacuum to attract more light. So every time I overcame a fear of the dentist, a fear of spiders, mundane fears at the beginning, a fear of going into karate competitions, a fear of actually saying I was afraid. I was afraid to say I was afraid. When every time I overcame a fear, and I can see this in retrospect, I released that light. So the fear was liberated. That was gone. The light that was in the fear came across to me, and my consciousness expanded a little bit. So I was able to see more, I was able to see clearer. So I started to build a modality and a courage. Then I could use that to confront the next fear and the next fear. But the moment I had this concept nucleus, this idea about overcoming my fear by absorbing 99% of it, sitting in the middle of it until it dissipated. The moment I had that idea, hope fell into my mind and curiosity. And that the brain has a strange function where it can't deal with curiosity and interest at the same time as it deals with fear. So as soon as I had this ray of hope, my life started to transform literally that day. I had a plan. So I started to confront the fears. I released the consciousness. Consciousness expanded. I was able to see more. So from the bottom of the pyramid, I went from being afraid of spiders to the top of the pyramid, where I was standing on nightclub doors with people who were trying to kill me. It was a very dangerous job. I mean, 4 of my friends were murdered in that job. So it was an expansion of consciousness. It was a conversion of darkness into light, or a conversion of ignorance into knowledge. And it was certainty. Once you overcome a fear, that's what they call, in Islam, they call it yaqeen, which means certainty. It means that the truth is undeniably right in front of you. Nobody can take that off you. There's still other things to do, but I had yaqeen is an attribute of God. So it's like a hologram, that it's like a tincture of God or a tincture of light, but it contains all of it. It has the potential for all of it. So I just used that to climb the pyramid. And my final step was the fear of violent confrontation. By this time, I'd took control of my marriage again because I was bullied in my own marriage. I took control of my life. I'd come off night shift and shift work. I took a day job. I'd learned a trade. I became a bricklayer. My life expanded exponentially. I was teaching the concepts we're talking about. And suddenly I find myself standing on a nightclub door in one of the most violent, well, Poland is the most violent city in Europe for its size and population.
Geoff, can I just ask? I love that truth and the way that fell in and that openness to receive that, which has been played out throughout the rest of your life. I'm really interested also in that time or those years where you'd overcome these aspects, you'd allowed this light in, and yet somehow that got veiled or lost a bit or hidden for a while as you fell into something that on one hand you were confronting your demons to a degree, but there's this whole thing of if you do that, be careful that you don't become that yourself, basically.
Yeah.
To paraphrase. So what happened in those years as the confidence grew? Was it the ego that took over for a while? What happened that meant that you weren't just getting over those fears in the end? You were actually becoming something that even you weren't then happy with.
Yeah, that's the Nietzsche concept, isn't it? Be careful when you hunt the dragon that you don't become the dragon.
Yeah.
That's what happened to me. Up until the top of that pyramid, excuse me, everything was good. I was overcoming fears. I was expanding in consciousness. I was attracting lots of students because they recognized truth. I was starting to try and write about it in articles for magazines. But somewhere along the line, this parasite that was in me, or this pain body, or whatever you want to call it, this damaged cognition or this damaged perception, was starting to feed on the violence. I got very good at what I was doing. I found the truth, and I went to the truth. The truth was an interim truth, and the truth was, if I can control my adrenaline and hit first and be good at hitting first, I can win all of these fights really quickly. So they were over before they even began. Yeah. I got very good at that. I got quite a big reputation, and I started to be in demand. I could name my own price and work on any door. And I was working with some of the most violent people in the city, but I became very violent myself. I would say that I became a bully. It's not easy for me to say because I saw myself as Robin Hood. But actually, I'd become a bully myself, and I was using violence. This is when the egregore of the door said, "Well, do you really want to look at the truth? Do you want to go deeper?" Because this was getting so easy for me.
In a way, was it handing you a second pyramid? Because one of the things that springs to my mind is you'd created a pyramid and you'd got to the apex. Actually, you had nowhere to go psychologically, right? So you needed a next movement or something, as Gurdjieff might talk about, sort of a nudge in the octave, something that would take you into that next space and allow you that next wave of expansion. So for me, it seems you got caught up in that apex to some degree. And that's only natural. Of course you would, because there's nowhere to go. But the universe presented you with the next window, let's say.
Yeah, it was like a new Dharma gate opened.
Yeah.
And it was up to me whether I wanted to go through that.
Absolutely.
It was more like an internal pyramid. So it said, well, we know what works. You can see what works. You're good at what works. But if you understood the fixed laws of this spinning planet, you'd recognize that you are doing this, but you're creating a lot of karma for yourself.
Yeah.
It's a reciprocal universe. Everything you think and say and do, and you are doing it in extremis, is going to expand. So I was feeding this parasite in me, this insecurity, on a glut of violent books, on all of the necessary and appropriate violences and pornographies for that world. I became a person that I didn't like and a person I didn't recognize. So it said to me, "Do you want to go deeper?" And it said, "At the moment, you're looking at all of these people, and you're knocking them all out. but there's a common denominator, and that is everywhere you go, there is violence. It's not everywhere everybody goes, it's everywhere you go. It's what I said to my wife. This city is so violent. Everywhere I go, there's violence. She said there's a common denominator. It's everywhere you go. I was fighting at funerals, I was fighting at weddings. I knocked somebody out at a christening, and people bought me beers afterwards because it was a local bully. But that was where my life was.
Yeah.
And this egregore said, "Do you want to go deeper?" And it said to me, you are creating monsters with your perceptions. You are forgetting that you've created them, and then you're designing weapons and strategies to defeat the very monsters that you've created and forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But every time you take the head off one, another one comes.
Well, cool. Geoff,
so
can
I
ask?
got loads and loads of them coming at me. So it said, once it showed me that I was trying to fix the world at the level of the screen.
Yeah.
It was saying, why don't you come back and fix the world at the level of the projector?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's when I started to go inwards instead of outwards. So it became the greater jihad.
Yeah, absolutely. And also became, in terms of your martial Budo journey, it was the internal aspect coming out of the external and switching to the internal, which I suppose ultimately gave you the ability to reflect and probably sit more comfortably with your higher dans than you did maybe looking in the mirror as a fifth dan, for example.
yeah, looking at in the mirror as a fifth dan, as a master grade, and seeing myself as I was 5 stone overweight. I was addicted to sexual porn. I was psychotically insecure and jealous. The only thing I could really do was have a fight. I had lots of good qualities. I was still a kind person, but I was deeply insecure. You wouldn't be safer in the room because I was there. That's for sure. In Budo, the idea is that people should, if you're in a room, people should be safer because you're there. Not just because you can protect them from negative people, but they're protected from you. You're not going to hurt them because they make a mistake. I wasn't safe to be around. And when I looked in the mirror as a proud fifth dan and saw that, it was a shock. It was a real shock. I could not hide from the fact that I was not in any sense a master. So I started to work internally. So I started to contract all of the negativity, all of the parasitical malware that I was downloading. And as I contracted that too converted into consciousness, and I kept expanding. But that made the doors very dangerous for me, Caspar. Because if you're on the door, the guy that's carrying the greatest parasite load is the guy that's going to come out and win all the fights.
Yeah.
This is a study they did in America with beetles, and obviously I've seen it translate over to people. The beetles with the highest parasite load won all of the fights. The ones with the lower parasites load lost against the ones with the higher parasite load. You know the only ones who were protected? The ones with no parasites. The ones with no parasites defeated the ones with loads of parasites every single time. There wouldn't even be a conflict. So as I was starting to decrease my aggression and convert it into light, and I was starting to try and live kindly, made the doors very dangerous for me because my parasite load started to become lower than the people around me. And I became a target for them.
But Geoff, that background hum of being abused when you were much younger, around 11, I believe it was. Yeah. So that was still bubbling. I mean, coming on to and touching on 99 Reasons to Forgive, because it's the thing that I've read, obviously, most recently of yours. No matter what you were doing, it was a bit like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic to some degree, or this thing of the projector versus the film. That almost no matter what you did or how far you believed you were coming, this thing was always going to reel you back in. And it seems to me that up until the point that you had that interaction with your abuser and allowed reciprocity to take over and true forgiveness to happen, actually you were always tethered in some way. So I found that in terms of 99 Reasons to Forgive, that really is an absolute central area of it, that you couldn't move on until that parasite that we're touching on now had been released.
That's very true.
Yeah,
that's very true. I've always said abuse is possession. An abuser leaves a parasite in there. If you catch it quickly, and you can treat someone that's been abused quickly, you can get that out again, you know, with dialogues and with counselling. Mine wasn't treated. I was too afraid to speak, so it grew. So I was put out by maybe that much when I was 11. By the time I was 40, I was out by a country mile. I was uncontrollable. So you're right. Until I actually, you know, remove that parasite and wash that schema or clean that schema, I was never going to be able to get away from this, because it was always going to draw me in, because it's like a beacon. It's like a frequency. So you've got other people who've got the same viruses in them. They were attracted to that. And there's also a body, like a world virus or a world pain body, or a demonic energy around that has its tentacles working through lots of different people and that is ultimately feeding off everybody.
Except the only thing is, there's a weird aspect of all of this, in that it contains the genesis of a certain type of searching, seeking, and energy.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, although obviously it's an awful experience, you wouldn't be obviously none of us would. Well, whatever's gone before makes what we are now. But a lot of the more beautiful aspects that have come into your life, I don't believe you would have necessarily, you know, come to find them or experience them.
No, this put me on that path. That's one thing I'm certain of.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why I'm certain of that, because when I was suffering with depression, I searched high and low for books that would help me to overcome it. I was desperate. But every time I picked a book up that promised to give me an answer on the blurb, it wasn't there. Every time I spoke to somebody, they didn't have an answer. The people that said they had answers either didn't have the answers, or they were too afraid to speak the answers. Even at my karate class, when I was still a student, I would say to people, "Are you afraid?" And they would go, "No, I'm not afraid." So I thought it was just me. And all of this, because all of these doors closed, all of the external doors closed, it forced me to go in. So this energy was saying to me, "We don't want you to get answers out there. We want you to go and find unique answers for yourself." The moment I started to look at that, everything started to change.
Because that comes back to this whole notion of truth. And what I find most compelling about your work, other than the fact I find a lot of humor amidst the wisdom, is the fact that you are absolutely there and willing to share whatever truth you find. You're not playing the occultist game of saying, "Oh, I've got this, I've now mastered this, and it's for me." You've awoken to that truth that is beyond that we are, at our best, we are a conduit for a greater power, I think.
A vessel, yeah.
Yeah. Geoff, I've just noticed that we're, as ever, because we only run these as sort of 30 or 40-minute shows, we're up against a hard stop in a few minutes.
That's okay.
I'd love you to consider coming back. I think we've barely scratched the surface of where this is going. Again, 99 Reasons to Forgive. I found that a very profound book of transformation, and I'd urge anybody who's watching this to grab a copy. We'll put the details in the show more section below the video. But Geoff, if you can spare the time in the near future, please come back and continue the conversation.
Love to. If I could just leave people with one thing, have I got time?
Yeah.
I don't come on any of these shows to tell a sorry story. I come to say that there is hope.
Absolutely.
You know, that if I can escape as an ordinary kid, if I can benefit, actually, exactly as you said, my life is more profound and wider and more expansive because of what happened to me. So there is treasure in the ruins. And I'll say to the people out there, the people who are most afraid, the people who are most fearful, the people who are suffering with the most depression, the people who have got the most baggage, have the potential, even if these people are predators themselves, they have the most potential to convert light, to experience consciousness, because every one of those fears contains a spark of light, every single one of them. So don't think of it as a harbinger of doom. Think of it as a messenger of hope.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geoff.
To leave on. Yeah.
Brilliant message to leave on. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much indeed, my friend.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Lovely to see you both.
See you later, Geoff. Take care.